What's going on, Packers fans? Aaron Nagler here with special guest Mark Oldacres, one of our contributors at Cheesehead TV, talking about potential targets positionally in free agency. Mark, how are you today, man?
I'm good, feeling good. We're right starting draft season right now, so I'm feeling good about that.
Always a good time.
Yeah, it is a good time. It's a good time now for like the next sort of month or so, and then like after the combine, then it becomes like hell until the actual draft, where everybody just like throws out everything that they thought before.
Yep.
And then eventually comes back to it right before the draft. So
That's kind of how that works. Good. That's a good summation. And you mentioned the combine, where we will obviously hear from Brian Gutekunst, and he'll be asked a lot about free agency and the NFL, and its wisdom always puts the combine right before the start of free agency, meaning that they really can't talk about anything, and it's kind of kabuki theater. But we here can talk about it and, look through. I loved your article looking at 6 different positions the Packers could look at in free agency. I think it's an interesting twist. A lot of people are like, Khalil Mack, because he's going to be a free agent. Well, that's really easy to say, and that's probably fantasy land. But I like the approach in this article, which we have linked in the description of this video. Take me through these one by one, starting with wide receiver. I think it's funny, of all the positions you've listed here, this is the one I think is the least likely.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting situation. I think because what I really found and learned myself going through this exercise was just kind of like so much of every single one of these that we're going to talk about is massively dependent on information that we on the outside just don't have.
Right.
It's all based on how confident Brian is in certain players, certain positions, and a lot of that information is coming from stuff that isn't seen on Sundays throughout the season that just happened, that's happening during the week in training, in practice and stuff like that. So that's a big part of it. But with the wide receiver one specifically, I think the biggest X factor is just kind of, and again, this might be something even the Packers aren't going to find out for a while, is what's the outlook with Christian Watson? I mean, how long is he going to be out for? Because we kind of heard some conflicting stuff after the injury. At first it was, it's not just an ACL, it's kind of other stuff too, which could obviously be a real problem. But then kind of there was other stuff coming out saying, no, it's pretty clean. So, I mean, could he be, in theory, if he recovered quickly back in 9 months, which would put him around September, and he only misses a few weeks? I think that would be a big kind of deciding factor in this. I think if he is out for a long time, if they're kind of not confident that he's going to be able to contribute for them early in the season, which stands a good chance of being the case.
True.
I think we saw how the offense changes when he's not in there. And I don't think it's something they can just kind of stand pat if he's going to be out. But at the same time, their receiver room is kind of so crowded as it is. And I think with free agency, kind of like we always talk about, it's kind of filling holes in the roster so that when you hit the draft, there's nothing that you kind of need that you really have to chase. But I think there's another side to that, in that you kind of don't want to sign people in free agency to the point that you then can't draft that position. Like that you're just too full. Like you just have too many guys.
Right. Yeah.
And at the moment, like, assuming Watson misses obviously some of the season, but is going to be back at some point, the guys that we were excited about kind of 2 months ago are still all there. Like,
yes, exactly.
They're still
that was before they started dropping passes on 4th down in Minnesota. Mark.
Right. Exactly.
You're right.
We get it. Like, by the end of the season, the questions around the receiver room, which were valid, were being asked, by everyone.
Right.
And I do agree that I think there's an argument that they need to kind of be aggressive, and if they think they can get a real difference maker, then go for it, but that will always be the case. But it's never easy to do necessarily. I mean, you talk about T. Higgins, even if he reaches free agency, the Packers are going to be far from the only team trying to sign T. Higgins to a big contract,
right.
So it's easier said than done. And I just think at the moment, you look at the depth that they have, you still have Watson when he's back, you have Dobbs, you have Wicks, you have Reed, you have 4 guys there that you kind of, if you're the GM, probably trust and have a good sense that they're going to be able to push on and become the kind of players you want them to become. And he's kind of talked about that already. And then you still have Bo Melton and Malik Heath. I mean, are you going to reach a point where is anyone going to trade for a Romeo Dobbs? Because if they're not, you're not going to cut him. So then you're going to be looking at least 4. You're going to be going into the season with 4 receivers who are guys that you trust. If you go out and sign a free agent, that's 5 already. And then they already have a hard enough time spreading the
Getting
ball
those
around.
guys the ball, right?
So
Exactly.
it's like, are you really going to add someone else into that mix before the draft when a guy might fall to you that you really like in the second or third round? Like, yeah, I think it's kind of like it's up in the air, but I don't disagree that I think of all the positions, it kind of maybe is the least likely, and I don't think that's what Packers fans probably want to hear.
It's not, but given not just everything you just laid out, which I think is really well said, it's also just, historically how they've operated. Man, they just at that position in particular, there's nothing to suggest that they view it as a premium position. We talk
Right.
about that a lot with the draft, right? At cornerback, edge rusher, offensive tackle. These are the positions that not just through the way what they've spoken about, but their actions would tell you that's where they see the value, right? And that's where they see premium spots on their roster. And I don't see spending big money, which is, I think, what they would have to do for someone like T. Higgins. I just don't see them going down that road. But man, I've been shocked before.
Yeah.
It's not my first rodeo, so we'll see. We'll see how it plays out. Another position you highlighted is center, which I think this is interesting because they've made such, I'm not going to say a kind of noise about it because they've just kind of gone about their business, but it is kind of talked about all the time. The work they do drafting and developing offensive linemen. But I'm with you. I think this is an area where if there is somebody younger, up and coming, maybe coming off his rookie deal, that they feel like they can plug and play and is an upgrade over Josh Myers, this wouldn't shock me.
No, it wouldn't shock me. I think it would have to be like the right guy, and again, it's, this has been talked about already at this point, but there's not that kind of like, there's not the Josh Jacobs and the Xavier McKinneys in this class of free agents for the most part that are kind of guys who are hitting that second contract and they're 25, 26. Like it's not very common. Like there's a reason that doesn't really happen. And again, I think this kind of comes down to how do they feel within the building. To my eyes, they have 5 offensive linemen right now that they would feel comfortable rolling into the season starting. You have Walker, Jenkins, Sean Ryan, Jordan Morgan, and Zach Tom.
Right.
But the question they have to ask themselves is, do they think any of those guys can play center and play it well, to a strong level? Obviously, Elton Jenkins played it in college. When he's played it in the NFL, it hasn't gone that well, but could there be an argument there that, that's when he's just been like thrown in?
He's been thrown into it, right? Yeah.
Right. Like if he had a whole training camp working at center, could he kind of kick the rust off and get the feel for it back? Obviously, there's been talk about kind of last offseason about Zach Tom and how they feel he could be, a great center. And when they drafted him, they thought he might be a center, but he's been so good at tackle that you can't move him now.
Thing, right? Especially after this season where he was so good right up until the playoff game anyway. But he was so good he was so good this year at tackle, which again, premium position, right? Maybe they try that rather than pay him, maybe they say, Zach, why don't you move inside, buddy? And I'm sure he'll be not amiable to that. But
that's the other thing.
That feels like a wild swing, right?
Yeah, it's not just do you want to move him because he's really good at tackle? It's like he doesn't want to move. He wants tackle money. Like he wants to get paid tackle money, not center money. So why would he want to move at this point? And if he pushes back, it's not like they're really going to insist on it. Like, you know what I mean? So I kind of don't see that. I feel like there's been some talk of Ryan kicking in there, but he's never done it before. Mind you, he never played guard until he got to Green Bay.
The thing is he did run there in training camp, right? Like they kind of settled on him as their backup center, kind of the back half of the summer of training camp. And you did see him come in when Myers went down at the end of that playoff game. But I'm with you. It's not like they've trained him up with that position in mind.
Yeah, he's not like classically trained, as a center, as you would say. So it's kind of like, I think that's just the decision they have to make, is they have to say, do we think at the moment there's a guy on the roster that if we didn't sign anyone in free agency and the draft didn't fall the way we wanted it to, that we think can start at center for us next year? And if the answer to that is no, then they need to address it, obviously. If the answer is yes, they think they can get away with it, which it wouldn't surprise me, honestly, if that's the answer, because as we've talked about, like the thing they prize the most on the offensive line is versatility. They talk about it all the time. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if within the building, they're confident that they've got multiple guys still that they think they could throw in at center and would be fine. Wouldn't shock me at all.
That goes back to what you were talking about at the start. Like, the information they have is obviously exponential compared to what we have. And it really comes down I think this decision comes down to how do they feel about Jacob Monk, a
Right.
guy who didn't dress for half the season, right? And not because of injury. I mean, he was a healthy scratch. And I know I saw a lot of people kind of hand wringing, going, "Oh, what a waste of a pick," and all this stuff. But man, it's not like they ain't redshirted guys before.
Yeah.
Josh Nijman was basically inactive or not playing for like 2 years before he started at left tackle. So,
Right.
and I'm not saying that was the plan, but who knows? There's every possibility that internally they're thinking, "Yep, we're going to let Josh walk, and Monk's going to step in." And
Yeah.
the whole idea of free agency is just completely not even on their radar. I mean, that is a possibility, but again, that to your point, they know and we don't.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. And with Monk, I think like if you'd have asked people kind of after the end of the preseason, they probably would have been a bit more bullish out on the outside of that he could just take over from Myers, because I think he had a
Right.
pretty strong preseason.
Good summer. Yeah.
But then by the end of the year, all we then had to go off was the fact that he was like active most weeks, and then towards the end of the season was just inactive every single week. So, and at the end of the day, like if people want to talk about like wasted pick, I mean, what was he, like a 5th, 6th round pick? I mean, it's not.
You're throwing darts
It's like
down there
it's a
anyway.
developmental player. Like his tape coming out of Duke wasn't like amazing. Hence, he went in the 5th or 6th round. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think wouldn't surprise me at all if they just roll into training camp and say, look, if he goes out there and wins the job, like performs well, then great. Like that's a bonus. If not, we think we can probably just kick Jenkins in there and see how it goes. Like, yeah. And again, it's like, what's the options out there, of a free agent that you really think is going to kind of come in and just nail the job? Like, because if they come in and it's someone who competes for it, and then they kind of don't really get it done,
win that competition.
Right. And they just a center. It's like, well, then what? So we'll see how it goes.
The roster makeup is important. Flipping over to the defensive side, you have defensive line, which now you're talking my language, because this is where I do think there's a decent shot that they spend some money in free agency. My name is Osa Odigizua. I mess it up every time, but from the Dallas Cowboys, he was a huge draft crush, and he is set to become a free agent. We'll see if Dallas actually lets him hit the market. And that's the other thing about talking about free agency this early. There's so many things that are going to occur as far as re-signings and tags and things like that. But that's the type of player that I would suspect Brian would be interested in. A younger guy, still on the kind of come up, so to speak, in his NFL career, and would help provide some interior pass rush, something they desperately are in need of.
Yeah, I think this is another one again where we're going to kind of learn when they have to actually start taking action. We're going to learn what they think about the guys they have,
guys on hand,
the guys who are leaving, the coaching, it's like stuff like that, and what Hafley thinks is important. I think that's another part of it too, because I think the first question I asked myself about this was, do they think they need to replace or try and retain TJ Slayton? Because he's the only true big body that they have on the defensive line, and the numbers when he wasn't in the game defending the run were terrible, like compared to when he was. So do they think that's important to kind of get more of that? I mean, he's like a traditional nose tackle. I don't know, they don't use one in this scheme, but that's the build he has. But obviously that's not the kind of body type that is usually run in Hafley's scheme. So do they think that's important, or are they just kind of like, well, yeah, we got a nice year out of him, but like he's not something that we need, so we'll let him move on? And then the other question, is kind of how confident are they in the guys that they have right now, who probably the season before this one, you were kind of, like Carl Brooks had a good rookie year, Colby Wooden flashed a little bit. Devontae Wyatt is obviously kind of the pass rush presence on the inside. I don't think he's quite lived up to the draft, stock that was placed in him, but they have guys that are capable of rushing the passer, but it's just a case of, again, do they think, obviously they fired Rebrovich, and they're going to replace the defensive line coach eventually. And do they think that just a change of coach will kind of bring it out of these guys and that they have the talent? Or do they think, no, we need to aggressively go and get someone who can add to this? Because like you say, there are guys out there who are those kind of smaller defensive tackles who are more pass rush oriented, like an Odigizua, or Milton Williams is like the big name now, obviously, because he's having a good run towards the end of the season.
Right.
So yeah, it's kind of, how confident are they? Like, what do they think is going to be the thing that kicks this into gear? Is it just a change of coach? Like, this might bleed a little bit into the pass rush conversation as well. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if the biggest and only notable change outside of the draft that they make to try and upgrade how the front plays is just changing the coach. Like, that might honestly they might just be banking on that.
I
because
think,
they have
and I
more
do think
resources into it.
but that's the thing, right? Like, and I think that's probably a lot of Packers fans' fears. Like,
Yeah.
they just believe in the guys that we watched kind of get stoned repeatedly when they rushed 4 throughout 2024. Well, we were being asked to do different things, and if we just have a different coach and different approach, and because your point is valid as far as they have poured a ton of resources into the front in general. And you mentioned edge as another potential kind of look in as far as free agency goes. Man, the edge players, if they do make it to free agency, they're always going to be sought after, and they're going to be kind of the belle of the ball, right? And I'll be shocked if the Packers win some kind of bidding war on an edge player. Last year, obviously, they took the big swing with Xavier McKinney. He was by far and away the number one safety on the market, and they landed that. And they've got a bit more, maneuverability this year with the salary cap. But I'd be surprised just because of the amount of cap space lots of other teams have. And yeah, the Packers are in a healthy spot comparative to where they've been. But some of these other teams just have mountains of cap space because they're bad teams, right? But that means they can throw a ton of money at these guys. And they are, but you talk about premium positions, the edge players are the cream of the crop. So that to me is the one where I think, yes, they'll make calls, but I'd be very surprised if they won one of these guys in free agency.
Yeah, I think what it's going to come down to is I think this will be the thing where, I mean, Brian talked about kind of needing to like up the urgency.
Right.
I think we'll kind of like find out if he's going to put his money where his mouth is on that at the edge position specifically, because what most GMs would do in his situation, and his situation is that Lucas Van Ness is a first round pick who was picked 13th overall, and going into his third year would ideally be the no doubt starter across from your other first round pick, Rashawn Gary, and have had like that second year jump, and you're feeling good about where he's going to be in year 3. That's not the situation he's in. He was kind of, playing behind Kingsley and Igbare by the end of the season, or for most of the season.
Couldn't get on the field. Yes, and
couldn't get on the field. Like,
that's the disconcerting part. Yeah.
So when you talk about it's time to up our urgency, how do you mean that? Because if you mean that, then you maybe go and you try and chase a Khalil Mack, someone like that, because he's the one that kind of like feels like it makes the most sense for Green Bay just because of almost the age. I think teams that you're talking about, like bad teams that have a lot of money, they're not going to throw probably money at a 34-year-old. Right. They're probably thinking they're looking for those guys like a McKinney and a Jacobs, or in that mold of the younger guys, and we're going to try and build it over multiple years. But if the Packers are talking about, okay, we've built the roster to a good point, now we're trying to hit the go button, then someone like Mack could make sense for them. But if you brought him in, you are planting him firmly ahead of Van Ness.
Yeah. How can you not? You have to.
Like,
you absolutely have
without
to.
a doubt. Like, there's no doubt he's the starter. So are you ready to do that? Like that for a GM is one of the hardest things to do, is like you're only 2 years in, which isn't really that long. And you're going to basically say, we don't think this first round pick is working out. Like, and it's, a high pick.
We don't have time to wait. We don't have any more time to wait. And that would make sense. I'd get it.
Yeah.
I'd understand.
But on the flip side, do you just kind of carry this? I mean, by him trading away Preston Smith, it's kind of like given, and obviously, like we talked about, there's other guys on the roster that performed pretty well, and Igbare, had a role, and even Brenton Cox and Aaron Mosby a little bit, played. If he just leaves it status quo, then it gives the whole of training camp, it gives Van Ness every opportunity to go and win that job. He's he'd be like begging him to go win the job.
You're rolling out the red carpet. Please go win the job.
Like, please go win the job. Like, because it's going to be really bad if you don't. Like, we kind of need to go win the job.
So true.
So that's the decision. And unfortunately, that's, again, probably not something fans really want to hear. It's like, you just want to hear, like, no, they just want to go make the team better. But unfortunately, there is an element of, like, when you make high picks, they're long-term investments that you believe in for a reason.
Yep.
And again, are you banking on change of coach, second year in Hafley's system, that he can make that jump? Like, it would be
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's another kind of component when you talk about Van Ness that I try to remind everybody on. This will be the first year he's had kind of work in the same scheme since like his last year in Iowa. You know what I mean? Like, he went from playing at Iowa, where he wasn't a starter, rotational guy, and then his rookie year, he's with Barry, and then last year he's with Hafley. Like, he's been in 3 different systems in the last 3 years. So I understand there's a little grace there from my end. As far as, okay, you're probably being asked to do very different things each and every season. So I can kind of understand maybe it's taking a bit, right? But man, the continuity, hopefully new coaching, to your point, it's got to happen this season. It absolutely has to.
And I think that's the case for kind of a lot of guys, on this defensive line and on this front in general this year, because like we're saying, they're changing the coach. That's basically like saying, oh, well, it's not the talent.
Right.
It's the coaching, it's the way they're being coached. So then for a lot of these guys and other positions too, that are entering year 3, year 4, now there's no more excuses left. Like it has to happen. I'm not saying Van Ness has to go out and be an all pro, but like it has to be, he needs to, if he's in a position to win the job,
be on the
win
field.
The job.
My God.
Get on the field. Like, yeah. So
that's the craziest part. You also have linebacker listed, which I find interesting because they have a number of guys in-house who are set to become free agents in, Eric Wilson and McDuffie, who I do think there's a decent chance McDuffie is back. I think there's a decent chance both of them are back. But this is a spot, this is a position that would surprise me. I know they've kind of maybe changed gears as far as, selecting Walker when they did, and they obviously just invested a 2nd-round pick in Cooper. They've got talent there. But if those guys that I just mentioned walk, I could see this as maybe a supplemental approach to like building the back end of the linebacker room.
Yeah, I think if they were to delve into free agency, a linebacker, it's not going to be some big investment. It's going to be kind of bargain bin hunting in a way, like what they've done before, where like you bring in a Devondre Campbell and you struck on it. Like they brought in other players where it didn't work out that way. But yeah, I think it was kind of that realization looking at the roster and the depth chart that like Wilson and McDuffie, who played a lot of snaps, are leaving. Like in theory, leaving. Like you say, they may just bring them back because I don't know how much interest they're going to have. Like they might be more valuable to Green Bay than anybody else. Like they might just bring them back,
especially McDuffie.
Yeah, especially because obviously has the history with Hafley and stuff like that. So I think if they just brought those two back, then that would be the answer. That would be like the solution. Sure. But it's just kind of if they think, no, like we think we can maybe find something a little bit better. Maybe there's a guy out there on the
talent floor a little bit. Yeah.
A little bit. Yeah. Especially because they changed scheme this year. So it's kind of like you may be asking some backers to do different things. It's like, is there a guy out there that you think does something different for you? But I think the other thing that factors into this is Tyron Hopper as well, because obviously he was a 3rd-round pick a year ago, which I think shocked a lot of people. A
lot of people were scratching their heads at that one, no doubt.
I tell you, I was furious when they picked him because
furious. Mark was furious.
And the reason is it's nothing to do with him specifically,
right?
But he was a guy who I didn't have as like someone that they might even take, like just based on kind of his athletic profile and stuff like that. Yep. So I hadn't watched a single snap of him at all. And also he like wasn't a very highly thought of prospect, so I just didn't really get that far. And then I was tasked with writing the full analysis breakdown of that pick for Cheesehead TV on the website. And of course, like the other players,
one dude you had not studied,
right? Like all the other guys, I think I did a couple more, and I already had obviously thoughts and tape and everything I'd watched,
right?
But like I was literally like, oh, I have to start completely from scratch. Like I don't know anything about this guy, and I have to write about him in like a day. Like
that's it. I'm gonna tell Brian to like make sure he picks at least one guy every draft that you have never heard of or know about, so that
he does that. That's exactly what he does. Like I was thinking about it, like that draft class last year. It was all going so like logically. Like every pick was like, yeah, that makes sense.
That was a big curveball, though. You're right.
And then it's usually day 2. At one point, they just do some random stuff that you've just like. They just pick someone that every year they do it where you go.
When they took AJ Dillon, Dillon was that pick that year, where everyone was like, "Oh, running back in the second." Yeah. What?
Some people were like a lot of people were like, "Who is that?" Like I don't even know who that is. Like it's just they do just kind of. I think sometimes it's almost like they make one pick a draft where they just like spin a wheel, or they just like get like what they just like go to one of the scouts and say, "Who do you like?" And it's just very random, but. Yeah, so he's kind of the X factor because again, he was a 3rd-round pick a year ago, Hopper, and didn't play like at all, basically, except in like garbage time a little bit, I think. And like I think it comes down to kind of, do they think he can start this year in base? Like, can he start in base?
Can he be one of the three, right?
Yeah,
You would
because if
hope
he
so.
can, he doesn't have to be on the field all the time.
Well, he
But
could be
like,
their thumper. That's my thing. Like, if they
right,
want him to be in there on obvious or not obvious, but early downs, right? The more likely rundowns. Like, yeah, let him go, man.
yeah,
I'm all for that life. Like, I
yeah,
think they probably want Walker and Cooper out there the majority of the time. But anytime you're facing a team that likes to button it up and run the ball and play power, get Hopper on the
yeah.
field. I think that makes a world of sense.
Yeah, 100%. I think the only reason, like, ultimately as well, I had this position on the list is because I think, honestly, like, if you asked people, like, what do you think the state of the Packers linebacker room is? If you took Edger and Cooper out of it, they would not feel good about it, like,
Nope.
at all. So,
Exactly.
like, and we saw a lot of times towards the end of last season, especially when Cooper was out for a while, they got picked on, like, in coverage consistently.
Repeatedly.
So,
Yes.
again, this might be more of a draft thing, but, like, I just wouldn't think that they're kind of just going to. Maybe I'd be a little surprised if they just brought back Wilson and McDuffie on 1-year deals and just rolled the same stuff back out there. But again, we got, Xavier McKinney talking about how Quay Walker can become one of the best linebackers in the league or the best. So
we'll see.
Again,
I like
year 2
it.
in the system, you never know.
But to your point, like the idea of raising the floor there makes all the sense in the world because you are going to have to deal with injuries, right? And it was kind of depressing to watch teams just run off coverage repeatedly and then have a back or a tight end just sit down at the sticks and first down and on they go. And they did that repeatedly. And their linebackers, whoever they were just not good enough in that regard. So I would not be surprised if they did something depth-wise. Finally, here we go. Now here's the third rail. We're talking cornerback in free agency. And again, as we talked about earlier, it is a premium position. No question about it. The Packers view it that way. So I would think, yes, the guardrails spending-wise are probably off at that position. I think this all comes down to the guys who are available. And in first blush, and I always talk about having to wait until re-signings happen and tags happen, but even before all that, this is not a great free agency class at corner. That said, maybe there is one guy they think is a perfect fit for what they're trying to do. So, yeah, this one's going to be interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I think obviously the first question you have to ask at corner, which everybody's been talking about, is Jair and what's going to happen there. Obviously, the general consensus is that he's probably not going to be here.
He gone.
He probably is. But like,
he's gone. Yeah.
But like, I honestly struggle with it because I just think like, okay, you get rid of Jair Alexander. Okay, now what then?
Yeah.
Like you have to I understand.
End of Finding Nemo when they're all in the water and they're just floating there. And now what?
Now what? Yeah, like there has to be then something has to happen after that. Like everybody out there is talking about how they don't like Green Bay's corners when like Alexander's not on the field. And I understand like the injuries is the main point, but like when you kind of look at the guys who are available, again, unless they think there's someone who maybe is like a sneaky pick that they think like a pickup they can make that like he's going to perform better for us than he has other places, and they get that right, like they've done with Rasul Douglas and people like that. Like, unless that's there, you look at the list, like it's really not that good of a list of like free agents, and even like someone like DJ Reed is kind of like he seems like the best option,
right?
But he's small. Like he's small, like smaller than even like Jair, like smaller than they usually do. Like and I know it's not like we're not talking about the draft, but they do tend to carry on their like size.
Sure,
stuff.
Yeah, of course they have thresholds that they want to adhere to. Yeah, no doubt.
Right, like the athleticism, not so much. Like once you've proven it in the league, they don't really care. But like size, they do care about. So like I don't know if that's that good of an option. And like, do they need another smaller guy? Like they're kind of. If you're talking about the slot, they kind of have guys that can play in the slot, like multiple. So it's interesting. I think that's where I come down with Alexander, where I'm a little bit like, are we sure this is the right thing? Like, is the best thing not to just like make the bet that maybe he stays healthy? Like, I don't know. Like, I could be. That's probably not what's going to happen because people's feelings and how people.
I just think it's so clear
with each other are involved in this, and Jair seems a little bit. I don't know.
Here. That's a big
kind of disconnect. I know Guti kind of tried to play it down, but there's something going on there. So like he's probably gone just on that basis alone.
Agreed.
To be honest, but
agreed.
Yeah, back to the actual like free agency side of it. I think if Alexander leaves, then it suddenly kind of makes the rest of the depth chart look worse. I think if you have like Alexander at the top of it, and he's on the field and healthy, the rest of it, you go, oh, yeah, that's fine. Like, we can totally get by with that. But without him, suddenly you're starting outside corners a Nixon and Valentine, which
right.
it's probably not as bad of a place to be
You
as
can win
people
with them.
think.
You can win with them, no doubt.
Yeah. I think, Keyshawn, I think, surprised everybody with how well he acquitted himself when he moved outside. And Valentine, obviously, you think the arrow's going up for him still. Like, he's got so much talent,
Agreed.
he can really, he can do it. Like, you've seen him do it, like have really high level stuff. So that's, that's great. But there was also times towards the end of last season where the corners were doing all right, but it's because they were like hiding them. Like they were hiding the corners. Like
there
that's why they played so
to
much
me,
cover
that's what
two.
this is all about, is giving Hafley more options and being
Right.
able to utilize all of the scheme rather than having to play a certain style. And Matt alluded to it, right? That was about the pass rush, but it's kind of like how you're forced to get into certain things and play certain coverages because you want to make sure you're helping your corners and you don't want to expose them. I mean, that was the whole Minnesota game. Like, they did a good job that second Minnesota game of clamping down somewhat on Justin Jefferson until like later in the second half, but it came at the expense of other guys being open. And it was a certain style of defense that they were playing with their corners very far off, especially in obvious passing situations, kind of flooding the zone, so to speak, with corners. But they're all playing like either cover 3 or cover 4, lots of cover 2, eyes on the quarterback. Like, you're not asking these guys to man up, because when they did, it was problematic, like you're pointing out. Like, so to me, yes, this is a position that it makes sense if for no other reason that you raise that talent floor and you give Hafley more options, and he's not kind of buckled into having to play a certain way.
Yeah, exactly. I think Hafley, honestly, he does. I don't think he'll ever get enough credit for. I mean, by the end of the year, he was basically running a defense that could not rush the passer, and he was trying to hide the corners at the same time.
Right.
And yet they were restricting people consistently. Like they were a good unit despite that. So you're 100% right. I think this offseason, I think probably draft wise and free agency wise, he's earned now the respect of that Brian should say, okay, let's get this guy some horses.
Yeah, I totally agree. Mark, I really appreciate it. Like I said at the start, the link for Mark's article is in the description of this video. Mark, I'm sure I'll be talking to you again here down the stretch throughout the offseason. Thanks so much for your time, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, no problem. Good to talk to you.